They were the legends of Hollywood. The world applauded their talent, their charisma, their unforgettable roles. On the screen, they were flawless, radiant with charm, larger than life. Hollywood gave them the spotlight, the money, the adoration. But it couldn't give them peace. Behind the curtain, something darker brewed. Some of the brightest stars carried a secret, one that clung to them like a shadow. Long after the cameras stopped rolling, they remained intoxicated, sedated, desperately chasing a silence that fame could never deliver. For some, the bottle was a coping mechanism. For others, it was the only thing they could rely on. They drank on set. They drank before premieres. Some drank through interviews, others just never stopped. Some lost their careers. Others lost their lives. And yet, the machine kept rolling, pretending everything was fine, even when it wasn't. Today, we look back at 25 Hollywood stars who were always drunk, and no one dared to stop them. Peter O'Toole, the brilliant wreckage. He was tall, sharp-featured, and unmistakably magnetic. Born in 1932 in Ireland and raised in Leeds, Peter O'Toole exploded onto the global stage with Lawrence of Arabia, a role that earned him instant immortality. His icy blue eyes, aristocratic diction, and stage-trained voice turned him into one of Britain's finest cinematic exports. In the 1960s and 70s, O'Toole wasn't just acting. He was defining what greatness looked like on screen. But off-screen, he was constantly drunk, and not just mildly tipsy. O'Toole drank with a kind of reckless poetry. He once described himself as a functioning alcoholic in a state of grace. Friends recalled entire dinners where he would down multiple bottles of whiskey and still recite Shakespeare without missing a beat. His health began to crumble in the late 1970s. He nearly died from pancreatitis, suffered major surgeries, and was warned repeatedly that his drinking would kill him. But stopping wasn't easy for a man who had spent decades hiding behind alcohol like it was a costume. Peter O'Toole passed away in 2013, not from a dramatic overdose or a public collapse, but quietly at age 81. The man who had once drunk himself into oblivion lived longer than many expected, but much of that life was spent in a haze. One close friend once said, "Peter wasn't escaping from anything. He was escaping from everything." His legacy? Genius intertwined with ruin. 2. Richard Burton, drowning in glory and gin. With a voice that could seduce thunder and eyes that flickered like smoke, Richard Burton was pure electricity on stage and screen. Born in 1925 in a Welsh mining town, he rose from poverty to international fame with commanding roles in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, Cleopatra, and The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. His diction was perfect, his delivery unmatched, and his presence volcanic. But Burton's genius was shackled to his greatest weakness, alcohol. His marriage to Elizabeth Taylor, twice over, was one of the most scandalous and passionate love affairs in Hollywood history. And at the center of their turbulent relationship was booze. They drank together, fought bitterly, made up, and drank again. Burton often arrived on set already drunk, sometimes barely able to stand. He once claimed to have consumed a bottle of vodka before breakfast. His diaries revealed periods of heavy regret where he described his body as a ruin and his mind a prisoner in amber. Despite his brilliance, he never won an Oscar, though he was nominated 7 times. Many say alcohol robbed him of greatness that might have surpassed Brando or Olivier. In 1984, Richard Burton died suddenly from a cerebral hemorrhage in Switzerland. He was 58. His liver, according to his autopsy, was twice the size of a normal man's and hardened like stone. One director quietly remarked, "Burton could have played kings. Instead, he drank like one until there was nothing left to crown." 3. Judy Garland, the voice that fell apart. She was America's sweetheart, the girl who sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow and made the world believe in magic. Judy Garland, born Frances Ethel Gumm in 1922, became a star before she even became a woman. MGM molded her, painted her, dressed her, and fatally drugged her. Her schedule as a teen idol was grueling. Studio doctors gave her amphetamines to keep her awake and barbiturates to help her sleep. But between the pills came something else. Alcohol. First a release, then a requirement. By the 1950s, Garland's dependency on alcohol had worsened. She was unreliable on set, prone to mood swings, and frequently hospitalized. Her marriage to director Vincente Minnelli failed. So did the ones that followed. Alcohol blurred the edges of her pain, childhood trauma, stage pressure, loneliness. She was dropped by MGM, attempted suicide multiple times, and often performed drunk, slurring through songs that once soared like silk. Yet even in her decline, the raw brilliance was undeniable. Her 1961 comeback concert at Carnegie Hall remains one of the greatest live performances ever recorded, delivered with trembling hands and tear-soaked breath. On June 22, 1969, Judy was found dead in her London home. She was 47. The coroner cited a barbiturate overdose, but the truth was deeper. Her body had given up after decades of abuse, including years of alcohol dependency. Liza Minnelli, her daughter, once whispered in an interview, "My mother didn't die from drugs, she died from heartbreak, and years of drowning it in a bottle." Harper 4. Errol Flynn, the original bad boy of Hollywood. Before there was Johnny Depp or Leonardo DiCaprio, there was Errol Flynn, the swashbuckling, sword-wielding heartthrob who made women swoon and directors sigh in exasperation. Born in Tasmania in 1909, Flynn became a Hollywood sensation with films like Captain Blood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, and The Seahawk. On screen, he was all charm and agility. Off screen, he was a walking scandal. Flynn drank constantly. His parties were infamous, orgies soaked in champagne and gin. He reportedly had a flask sewn into his boots and drank before, during, and after takes. One co-star once said, "He wasn't acting. That devil-may-care grin, that was the whiskey talking." By the late 1940s, his alcoholism had caught up with him. His once athletic figure ballooned, his skin grew blotchy, and his energy dimmed. But he kept going, writing memoirs, doing TV interviews half-sloshed, and desperately clinging to a myth that even he no longer believed. In 1959, Errol Flynn died in Vancouver at age 50. The coroner listed a heart attack, but his liver was pickled, and his body was said to be that of a man twice his age. He once told a reporter, "I've had a hell of a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. But you can't outrun the bottle, even if you wear boots and a sword." 5. Ava Gardner, beauty drenched in bourbon. She was the epitome of smoldering glamour, emerald eyes, raven hair, and a southern drawl that could cut through silence like silk through smoke. Born in 1922 in North Carolina, Ava Gardner became one of MGM's most magnetic stars, dazzling audiences in The Killers, Mogambo, and The Barefoot Contessa. She wasn't just beautiful, she was dangerous, enigmatic, untamable, and she drank heavily. Her tempestuous marriage to Frank Sinatra was legendary, filled with explosive arguments, passionate reconciliations, and oceans of alcohol. Friends and staff recalled evenings when Ava would start with martinis, move to scotch, and end with slurred monologues about love, death, and the emptiness of fame. Ava was the kind of woman who drank not to forget, but to feel. She once said, "I either write the script of my life, or I drown in someone else's story." Alcohol gave her agency and destroyed her all the same. By the 1970s, she had faded from the spotlight. A series of strokes left her partially paralyzed, and her once mythic beauty was replaced with frailty. She spent her final years in London, mostly alone, watching old films and sipping quietly in the dark. She died in 1990 at age 67. No grand tributes, no parades, just a closed casket and a world that barely remembered. Frank Sinatra paid for her funeral, but never attended. Perhaps out of guilt? Or perhaps because he knew Ava had been gone long before her body stopped breathing. Number 6. Oliver Reed, the beast who couldn't be tamed. He wasn't just an actor, he was a storm in human form. Oliver Reed, born in 1938 in London, brought an unmatched intensity to every role he played. From Women in Love to The Devils and Gladiator, his presence was magnetic, even when his body was wrecked and his eyes bloodshot. Reed drank like others breathed. On film sets, in pubs, on national television, he didn't care where or when. Once, during a talk show, he appeared so drunk he couldn't form a sentence. He challenged strangers to arm wrestling matches in bars. He was banned from multiple hotels for violent drunken outbursts. He famously claimed to have drunk over 100 pints of beer in 2 days, along with bottles of whiskey and gin. His lifestyle became part of his myth, but it also hollowed him out. Producers dreaded hiring him, unsure if he'd show up sober or at all. In 1999, while filming Gladiator in Malta, Reed walked into a bar and began drinking with British sailors. By the end of the night, he had reportedly downed multiple bottles of rum, beer, and whiskey. He collapsed shortly afterward and died of a heart attack. He was 61. Ridley Scott had to use CGI to finish his scenes in Gladiator. Reed didn't live to see the film win the Oscar. A fellow actor once said, "Oliver drank like he wanted to outrun something, but the truth is, he was the thing being chased." 7. W.C. Fields, the comedian who laughed through a fog of booze. Long before stand-up comedy filled arenas, W.C. Fields was Hollywood's king of sardonic wit. Born in 1880 in Pennsylvania, he was one of the first comedic stars of the silent and early sound era, known for films like It's a Gift and My Little Chickadee. His character was always the same, a grumpy, tipsy misanthrope who hated children and loved liquor. The truth? That wasn't an act. Fields was rarely sober. On set, he hid bottles of gin in props, in flower vases, books, even inside fake snowmen. Directors would shout "action," only to find Fields wobbling, mumbling, slurring. Yet, somehow, he still delivered razor-sharp performances. He suffered from chronic alcohol-induced illnesses, cirrhosis, kidney issues, and tremors. But he refused treatment. In interviews, he'd crack jokes about doctors being worse than whiskey. To him, drinking wasn't just a habit. It was a statement. As talkies faded and his health collapsed, Fields became a recluse. He lived in a cottage at the back of the famed Beverly Hills Hotel, drinking alone, watching the sun sink behind the palms. He died on Christmas Day in 1946 at age 66. On his desk was a note that read, "I'd rather be here than in Philadelphia." It was a joke, or maybe it wasn't. In his own words, "I never drink water. Fish fornicate in it." But in the end, it wasn't the fish that drowned him. It was the bottle. 8. Tallulah Bankhead, the Southern belle who burned at both ends. She entered every room like a hurricane dressed in silk. Born in 1902 to a wealthy Alabama family, Tallulah Bankhead became one of the most talked-about actresses of the 1920s and 30s. Her performances in plays like The Little Foxes and films such as Hitchcock's Lifeboat were electric. But her offstage antics, scandalous affairs, outrageous parties, and unapologetic hedonism are what truly immortalized her. And she drank, constantly, loudly, publicly. Champagne was her morning tonic. Whiskey, her lullaby. She was once found passed out in her dressing room with an empty gin bottle and a cigarette still burning in her fingers. Her voice, gravelly, deep, and slurred, wasn't just natural. It was soaked in years of cocktails and chaos. Tallulah didn't care what people thought. She swore like a sailor, seduced both men and women, and once declared on live radio, "My dear, I'm as pure as the driven slush." Her drinking worsened as her fame declined. Roles became fewer, slurring more pronounced. She alienated friends, insulted producers, and vanished into a haze of booze and bitterness. She died in 1968 at age 66, ravaged by pneumonia, emphysema, and decades of alcohol abuse. Few attended her funeral. Her ashes were scattered, just like the fragments of her once luminous career, but the world never forgot the flame. Someone once wrote of her, "Tallulah didn't fade, she exploded into pieces, one sip at a time." 9. Dean Martin, the crooner who hid behind a glass. He was effortlessly cool, tuxedo sharp, smile lazy, voice like velvet. Dean Martin wasn't just a singer, actor, or comedian. He was a symbol. As part of the Rat Pack alongside Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr., he ruled Las Vegas and Hollywood alike. Films like Rio Bravo and songs like Everybody Loves Somebody made him beloved across generations. But behind the charm, there was always a drink in his hand. Literally. Dean Martin crafted an image of the lovable lush, slurring his jokes, stumbling across the stage, holding a rocks glass half full of what looked like whiskey. The public laughed. But what they didn't know was that the persona wasn't all performance. He did drink. A lot. Co-stars and crew described a man who'd sip quietly between scenes, who never shouted, never caused drama, just slowly disappeared behind the bottle. Though some claimed his onstage drink was apple juice, those who knew him best saw the toll alcohol took on his private life. His marriage fell apart. His relationships with his children grew strained. He began showing up late or not at all. And when his son died in a plane crash in 1987, something inside him shattered. From that moment, Dean all but withdrew from life. He passed away on Christmas Day, 1995, alone in his Beverly Hills home after years of declining health exacerbated by alcohol and grief. One Rat Pack insider once said, "Dean wasn't drunk because it was funny. He was drunk because it made everything quieter." 10. Elizabeth Taylor, the violet-eyed prisoner of pain. She was the epitome of old Hollywood glamour. With her violet eyes, opulent jewels, and scandalous romances, Elizabeth Taylor captivated the world like few others could. Born in 1932 in London and raised in Los Angeles, she was already a star by the time she was 12. Over the decades, she gave unforgettable performances in Cleopatra, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. But the real drama wasn't on screen. It was within her. Behind the dazzling gowns and tabloid headlines lay a woman deeply scarred, both physically and emotionally. Multiple back injuries, broken marriages, including 2 with Richard Burton, and the brutal pace of celebrity life left her dependent on something more potent than fame: alcohol. She began drinking heavily in the 1960s, often alongside Burton. Their relationship was equal parts passion and destruction, fueled by champagne breakfasts and whiskey-laced arguments. Elizabeth once admitted, "I drank to escape. I was drinking myself to death." Her health crumbled. She checked into rehab, not once, but multiple times. Publicly, she fought to reclaim her image. Privately, she remained haunted by the ghosts of loss, pain, and fading beauty. Later in life, she turned her battles into advocacy, becoming one of the first major celebrities to champion AIDS research. But the toll of decades of alcohol and prescription drug abuse left her frail and weakened. She died in 2011 at the age of 79 from congestive heart failure. Even in death, she wore diamonds, but they couldn't mask the years of sorrow behind those legendary eyes. A friend once said, "She didn't drink because she was wild. She drank because she was broken." And no one ever noticed until it was too late. 11. Truman Capote, the genius who pickled his pain. He was one of the most distinctive voices in American literature, flamboyant, razor-tongued, and impossibly brilliant. Truman Capote, born in 1924 in New Orleans, gave the world Breakfast at Tiffany's and In Cold Blood, redefining both fiction and journalism. But his sharp wit and literary triumphs masked a deeper darkness, a bottomless dependence on alcohol. Capote once described himself as a completely horizontal writer, one who did his best work lying down with a cocktail in hand. And that wasn't a joke. He wrote drunk. He spoke drunk. He performed interviews on national television while visibly slurring, barely holding himself upright. The literary world watched in horror as his genius unraveled. His descent was so public, so shocking, that it became part of the tragedy. He was no longer the darling of high society. He was the court jester, stumbling through interviews and alienating friends. His alcoholism worsened after the release of In Cold Blood. He felt exposed, spiritually empty, and creatively paralyzed. Rejected by the very social elite he once entertained, he retreated further into isolation and intoxication. Capote died in 1984 at just 59 from liver disease complicated by drug use. He passed away in a friend's guest room, far from the glittering salons and cocktail parties where he once reigned. Gore Vidal famously quipped, "Truman Capote died years before his death certificate was signed." And it was true. The man who once crafted literary perfection slowly drowned in his own need to be loved, and never found a cure for loneliness that couldn't be poured into a glass. 12. John Belushi, the comet that burned too fast. He was wild, unstoppable, and devastatingly funny. John Belushi, born in 1949, was the beating heart of Saturday Night Live's original cast. With unforgettable characters like Samurai Futaba and his chaotic charm in The Blues Brothers, Belushi didn't just make people laugh, he electrified them. But even from the start, there was a dangerous edge. He lived on the line between brilliance and breakdown, and alcohol was always close by. Belushi partied with a kind of desperation. His friends often described it not as indulgence, but as compulsion. He drank to loosen the fire in his veins. On set, he was often late, sometimes still drunk from the night before. At after parties, he could be found slumped on a couch, a half-empty bottle dangling from his hand. Alcohol was just one ingredient in a deadly cocktail. Combined with cocaine and heroin, it accelerated his collapse. But alcohol was constant, the quiet drumbeat underneath the chaos. In 1982, at the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles, Belushi's brilliant flame finally flickered out. He was just 33 years old, found dead from a speedball overdose. The room was a wreck, his body bloated, drained, lifeless. The tragedy was not just that he died so young, but that no one could save him from himself. Dan Aykroyd, his closest friend and co-star, later said, "If I had been there that night, maybe things would be different." But the truth is, John had been slipping for years, smiling through a fog of laughter and liquor. 13. Montgomery Clift, the beautiful ghost of Hollywood. He was one of the most gifted actors of his generation, delicate, intense, and utterly mesmerizing. Born in 1920, Montgomery Clift brought a quiet vulnerability to films like A Place in the Sun, From Here to Eternity, and The Misfits. He was the anti-Brando, less brawn, more soul. But behind that haunting gaze was a man unraveling, with a bottle always close by. Clift's descent began not with fame, but with tragedy. In 1956, he was in a horrific car crash after leaving a party at Elizabeth Taylor's house. His face was shattered, his jaw had to be wired shut. Though he recovered physically, emotionally he never returned. Something in him had cracked permanently. Painkillers dulled the nerves, but alcohol dulled the grief. He began drinking heavily, on set, off set, alone, in public. His performances grew erratic. His once youthful beauty turned gaunt, pale. Directors hesitated to cast him, unsure if he'd make it through the shoot without collapsing. By the 1960s, Clift had become a shadow of himself. Still immensely talented, but increasingly fragile. His final performances were like whispers of what once was. In 1966, at the age of 45, Montgomery Clift died alone in his New York apartment from a heart attack likely caused by years of alcohol abuse. There was no one with him, no final moment of redemption. A friend once called his last decade the longest suicide in Hollywood history. Elizabeth Taylor, who had once called him my soul twin, reportedly never recovered from his death, and Hollywood never quite understood how a man so brilliant could disappear so quietly, drowned not in scandal, but in sorrow. 14. Spencer Tracy, the quiet destruction behind the curtain. He was revered for his subtlety, his gravity, his absolute authenticity. Spencer Tracy, born in 1900 in Milwaukee, was the actor's actor, winning 2 Academy Awards and starring in classics like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Captain's Courageous, and Judgment at Nuremberg. On screen, he exuded calm strength. But off-screen, he was at war, with himself and with the bottle. Tracy's alcoholism was an open secret in Hollywood. He drank not flamboyantly, but relentlessly, in quiet corners, in private rooms, away from cameras. He was raised Catholic and plagued by guilt, which only deepened his need to escape. He remained married all his life, yet lived separately from his wife, entangled in a decades-long affair with Katharine Hepburn, an affair shadowed by secrecy and pain. Friends and co-stars described his mood swings, his brooding silences. When sober, he was brilliant. When drunk, he could be volatile, withdrawn, morose, unreachable. Alcohol wasn't just a vice, it was a mask and a wound that never healed. Hepburn once said, he drank to punish himself. For what? I'm not sure he ever knew. As Tracy aged, the drinking worsened. His health deteriorated rapidly, diabetes, heart disease, exhaustion. He was in and out of hospitals, often clinging to the edge of collapse. Yet he continued working, often delivering deeply moving performances, even as his body failed him. In 1967, just 17 days after wrapping his final film, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Spencer Tracy died of a heart attack. He was 67. At his funeral, Hepburn did not speak. She simply wept. His was a career of mastery and a life marked by silent destruction, one sip at a time. 15. Mel Gibson, the rage beneath the bottle. He was once the golden boy of Hollywood, handsome, talented, bankable. Mel Gibson, born in 1956 in New York and raised in Australia, shot to fame with Mad Max and Lethal Weapon. Later, he cemented his legacy with Braveheart, both directing and starring in the Oscar-winning epic. But behind his polished smile and steely gaze, a storm was always brewing, and alcohol was its fuel. Gibson's struggles with drinking weren't just whispers. They exploded into headlines. He'd been battling alcoholism since his early 20s, reportedly drinking so heavily during the Mad Max years that he later admitted to not remembering entire days of filming. His charm masked deep instability. By the 2000s, his drinking had become dangerous, both to himself and others. In 2006, Gibson was arrested for DUI. But it wasn't just the arrest. It was the anti-Semitic tirade he launched while intoxicated that shocked the world. Suddenly, the man once celebrated as a cinematic hero became a pariah. He checked into rehab, issued apologies, and vanished from the spotlight. For years, his career lay in ruins. Hollywood turned its back. Friends disappeared. Opportunities dried up. Gibson, once at the top of the industry, had become a cautionary tale. He would later return, notably with Hacksaw Ridge, but the scars remain. Not just professionally, but personally. His relationship strained, his reputation forever shadowed by the man he became when the bottle took over. One studio executive said he wasn't just drinking, he was detonating. Mel Gibson is still alive, still working. But the fury, the remorse, the addiction, they've all become a part of the myth he now lives with every day. 16. Lindsay Lohan, the tabloid tragedy in real time. Once hailed as the next great star of her generation, Lindsay Lohan seemed to have it all: talent, beauty, charisma. Born in 1986 in New York, she captured hearts in The Parent Trap, then grew into a teen icon with Mean Girls. But as her fame skyrocketed, so did something else: her dependence on alcohol. Unlike the stars of old Hollywood, Lindsay's unraveling didn't happen in private. It happened under the relentless flash of paparazzi cameras, nightclubs, courtrooms, mugshots. Her descent became a media spectacle. By her early 20s, Lohan had been arrested multiple times for DUI, cited for cocaine possession, and checked into rehab repeatedly. On film sets, she became unreliable, sometimes disappearing altogether. Directors were warned she might show up late or drunk or not at all. What made it all the more tragic was that Lindsay was talented, fiercely so. Her performances, even during her chaotic years, revealed flashes of brilliance. But alcohol, combined with toxic fame and no real support system, swallowed her whole. She once told Oprah in a televised interview, "I didn't know how to say no. I didn't know how to stop." The public mocked her. Late-night comedians turned her pain into punchlines. But behind the headlines was a young woman spiraling, not because she wanted attention, but because she didn't know how to survive without it. Though she has since attempted comebacks, her legacy remains fractured. She now lives largely out of the spotlight, a quieter existence far from the chaos of her early years. Lindsay Lohan didn't just fall. She was watched, ridiculed, and dissected as she did. And the bottle? It was both her shield and her undoing. 17. Nicolas Cage, the wild man on the edge of sobriety. He's an Oscar winner, a cult icon, and one of the most unpredictable actors to ever grace the screen. Nicolas Cage, born in 1964 into the Coppola film dynasty, built a reputation with roles in Leaving Las Vegas, Face Off, and Adaptation. His range was uncanny, from soulful to unhinged, and so too was his life off camera. Though never fully categorized as an alcoholic, those closest to Cage have long whispered about his tempestuous relationship with alcohol. During the late 1990s and early 2000s, his eccentric behavior, wild spending sprees, and bizarre public appearances raised eyebrows. And underneath it all, there was often a drink in his hand. Insiders reported drunken rants on set, missed calls, and nights spent stumbling through bars in foreign countries. He once spent $150 million in a few years on castles, rare artifacts, and extravagant parties, many of them soaked in champagne and bourbon. His arrest in 2011 for public intoxication in New Orleans marked a low point. Cage was found shouting in the street, allegedly drunk and belligerent. The man who once channeled raw human emotion on screen now seemed like a caricature of himself. And yet, like a true phoenix, Cage survived, professionally and personally. He continued acting, often in smaller or stranger films, occasionally returning to form with powerhouse performances. But the specter of alcohol and the chaos it unleashed has never truly left his legend. A director once said, "Cage doesn't act drunk. He acts like a man constantly fighting madness, and sometimes the bottle wins." His story isn't over, but the battle lines have long been drawn. For 18. Anthony Hopkins, the man who chose to wake up. He's known to the world as Hannibal Lecter, chilling, refined, unforgettable. But Sir Anthony Hopkins, born in 1937 in Wales, is far more than a single role. He's one of the greatest actors of all time, with a towering career that spans The Remains of the Day, The Silence of the Lambs, and The Father. Yet for years, Hopkins harbored a secret enemy, one that nearly destroyed him before he chose to fight back. In his youth and early career, Hopkins drank heavily, not socially, not occasionally, but destructively. He often described himself as a functioning alcoholic, but the function was crumbling. He would show up to rehearsals drunk, miss appointments, alienate colleagues. He couldn't stop and didn't want to. Everything changed in 1975 when he woke up in a hotel room in a haze, unable to remember how he got there. Something broke open. He checked into Alcoholics Anonymous and never drank again. From that moment on, Hopkins began a new life, one driven by discipline, introspection, and brutal honesty. He later credited AA and spirituality with saving him. "I couldn't live with the chaos anymore," he said. "It was either drink or die." Unlike so many others on this list, Anthony Hopkins chose life. He didn't just survive, he soared. He reinvented his career, built lasting relationships, and became a beacon of resilience in an industry littered with lost causes. His story is a rare one, not of ruin, but of redemption, a reminder that the bottle doesn't always win. 19. Carrie Fisher, the princess who fell from the stars. To millions, she will always be Princess Leia, fierce, funny, and fearless. But behind the iconic buns and blaster, Carrie Fisher was a soul grappling with profound pain, and alcohol was often her first line of defense. Born in 1956 to Hollywood royalty, Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher, Carrie grew up in a world where the spotlight never dimmed. Her rise to fame with Star Wars was meteoric, but it came with a price. By her early 20s, she was already drinking heavily, not for pleasure, but for survival. Fisher was diagnosed with bipolar disorder in her 20s. She later admitted that alcohol was her way of self-medicating long before she understood her illness. The drinking led to harder substances, but alcohol was always her baseline, her numbing agent, her shield against the whiplash of fame and internal chaos. Her 1987 novel, Postcards from the Edge, a thinly veiled fictional account of her own life, portrayed a woman crawling through addiction, rehab, and the long, slow walk back to herself. It became a bestseller, then a film. But behind the biting humor was real suffering. In her memoirs and public appearances, Fisher spoke candidly, even comically, about her alcoholism. She turned pain into prose, out trauma into punchlines. But even then, the damage lingered. She died in 2016 at age 60 after going into cardiac arrest on a flight. Traces of alcohol and multiple drugs were found in her system. Her mother, Debbie Reynolds, died the next day. Carrie once said, "I'm not afraid of anything, except maybe running out of vodka." But perhaps what she feared most was being forgotten. She won't be. 20. Amy Winehouse, the voice that drowned in its own echo. She had a voice that felt like heartbreak set to jazz, raw, aching, defiant. Amy Winehouse, born in 1983 in London, wasn't just a singer. She was a phenomenon. With her beehive hair, Cleopatra eyeliner, and lyrics that cut like glass, she redefined modern soul in Back to Black. But just as fast as she rose, she began to fall, and alcohol was always in the shadows, waiting to pull her under. Amy's battles with addiction were painfully public. Tabloids captured her stumbling out of clubs, slurring on stage, collapsing mid-song. Rehab was more than just a lyric. It was a revolving door. Though drugs played their part, it was alcohol that ultimately did her in. She tried to quit. She really did. Friends spoke of her drying out for weeks, even months, but the pull was too strong. Her small frame couldn't take the repeated trauma. Her liver was failing by her mid-20s. Doctors begged her to stop. She didn't. On July 23, 2011, Amy Winehouse was found dead in her London apartment. She was 27. The autopsy confirmed what everyone feared: alcohol poisoning. There were 3 empty vodka bottles on the floor beside her. She joined the 27 Club, that cursed group of prodigies who burned too brightly and vanished too soon. In one of her final interviews, she said, "I don't think I'm going to be at all famous. I don't think I could handle it." And in the end, she couldn't. Not because she wasn't strong, but because no one showed her how to survive brilliance when it feels like a burden. 21. Robert Downey Jr., the phoenix who crawled through fire. He was once Hollywood's most promising young actor. Sharp, soulful, and infinitely watchable. Robert Downey Jr., born in 1965 in New York, inherited talent from his filmmaker father, but also inherited something darker: addiction. From his teenage years, alcohol was part of his life, and soon it would take over completely. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Downey's descent was legendary. Arrested multiple times for DUI, found wandering in strangers' homes while high or passed out behind the wheel, he became both punchline and tragedy. But what many overlooked was that alcohol was the gateway. The slippery slide into harder substances began with the bottle. In court, he famously told a judge, "It's like I have a shotgun in my mouth and my fingers on the trigger, and I like the taste of metal." Downey checked into rehab repeatedly. He escaped once, he relapsed, he was written off. Studios blacklisted him, directors refused to insure him, his marriage fell apart, his face, once boyish and alive, grew hollow. He was spiraling toward oblivion. And then he stopped. In 2003, after years of near death, Downey got sober, completely. With help from therapy, spirituality, and martial arts, he clawed his way back. The man who once slept in jail cells became Iron Man, a global icon. But his eyes never lost that haunted look, as if they still remembered what it was like to lose everything. Robert Downey Jr.'s story isn't just a comeback. It's a resurrection. A brutal, honest testament that sometimes even the most broken can return. Not because they were saved, but because they chose to rise. 22. George Jones, the voice that couldn't escape the bottle. They called him the Possum, but behind the nickname was a voice that could pierce the soul. George Jones, born in 1931 in Texas, was a country music legend, a man who sang of heartbreak, betrayal, and sorrow because he lived it all firsthand. His ballads like "He Stopped Loving Her Today" are considered masterpieces. But behind the music, Jones was drowning, literally, in alcohol. He was notoriously unreliable. He missed more concerts than he performed. Promoters referred to it as "No-Show Jones." He would vanish for days, then reappear drunk, angry, incoherent. His marriages imploded under the weight of his binges. Friends found him passed out in hotel bathtubs or holed up in motels with empty whiskey bottles and loaded guns. At one point, his addiction was so out of control, he drove a riding lawnmower to a liquor store because his wife had hidden the car keys. The image was absurd and tragic. Jones tried rehab, but often relapsed. Alcohol wasn't just a habit. It was stitched into the very fabric of his identity. He once said, "I didn't live the songs I sang. I survived them." In the later years of his life, he finally sobered up, after several near-death hospitalizations and a brutally honest intervention. The damage was done, but the voice remained. He kept performing, kept telling the truth through music. George Jones died in 2013 at age 81. At his funeral, the pews were filled with country legends, and the air was thick with sorrow, not just for his death, but for everything he lost to the bottle before he finally put it down. 23 more, the comic who couldn't laugh it away. He was small in stature, but enormous in charm. Dudley Moore, born in 1935 in London, won hearts with his wit, musical genius, and infectious laugh. He was the star of 10, Arthur, and a dozen other films that made audiences howl with laughter. But behind his sparkling eyes was a man quietly falling apart, and alcohol became both his mask and his medicine. His role in Arthur, where he played a perpetually drunk millionaire, was so convincing that fans often assumed he was acting. He wasn't. Moore later admitted that during filming, he was drinking heavily, not just to get into character, but because he couldn't stop. Alcohol dulled the pain of his failed marriages, his artistic frustrations, and the chronic self-doubt that never left him, despite his success. Friends noted his decline, slurred speech, erratic behavior, missed commitments. He would sometimes perform visibly intoxicated or disappear after shows, unable to face the world. In the 1990s, Moore's health took a terrifying turn. He began to stumble, forget lines, and lose coordination. At first, people assumed he was drunk. The truth was even crueler. He had progressive supranuclear palsy, a rare brain disease that mimics the symptoms of intoxication. The irony was unbearable. For a man long misunderstood as simply the funny drunk, his real affliction had hidden in plain sight. Dudley Moore died in 2002 at age 66 after years of decline and seclusion. In his final interviews, he spoke with quiet clarity, regretting nothing, except that people hadn't looked past the laughter. "They thought I was drunk," he once said. "They didn't see that I was drowning." 24. Billie Holiday, the blueswoman with whiskey in her blood. Her voice was smoke and velvet, aching with every note. Billie Holiday, born in 1915 in Philadelphia, changed the course of American music with songs like "Strange Fruit," "God Bless the Child," and "Don't Explain." She sang pain because she lived it, and the pain, for decades, was dulled by alcohol. Holiday's life was marked by relentless trauma, childhood abuse, racism, addiction, and violent relationships. She began drinking in her teens, and the bottle never left her side. Whiskey was her armor, her companion in hotel rooms, backstage corridors, and studio booths. She often showed up late for performances, sometimes too intoxicated to stand. Club owners sighed. Fans whispered. But when she opened her mouth to sing, all was forgiven, until the night ended and the spiral resumed. Her drinking intensified after heroin was criminalized, and she was imprisoned. By the time she emerged, her career was in shambles, and alcohol had taken its place as her central vice. Her once luminous voice grew raspy, her breath short. Still, she sang, because that was the only place she was ever free. In 1959, at just 44 years old, Billie Holiday died in a New York hospital from liver and heart failure. She had just 70 cents in her bank account. Even as she lay dying, federal agents handcuffed her to the hospital bed for drug charges. Her body, scarred by needles, liquor, and a brutal life, finally gave out. One of her last recorded lines on stage, "I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places." But the only place many ever truly saw Billie was through the haze of a bottle and the brilliance of her voice. 25. Charlie Sheen, the star who lit himself on fire. At one point, he was the highest paid actor on television, raking in millions for 2.5 Men while the world watched his every move. Charlie Sheen, born in 1965 in New York, was Hollywood royalty, the son of Martin Sheen, the breakout star of Platoon, Wall Street, and Major League. But his name would soon become synonymous with a very different legacy, an epic, unfiltered descent into alcohol-fueled madness. Sheen's partying was the stuff of legend. He drank relentlessly, often vanishing for days. He once claimed to have consumed vodka straight from the bottle while filming sitcom scenes. His binges weren't quiet. They were broadcast to the world through interviews, rants, and social media meltdowns. His 2011 spiral became a spectacle. He coined phrases like tiger blood and winning. But behind the bravado was a man in crisis. Alcohol, combined with drugs and unchecked mania, had reduced one of television's biggest stars to a caricature. He was fired from his show, sued, and publicly humiliated. But Sheen didn't stop. He drank through rehab, lashed out at co-stars, and isolated himself from nearly everyone who cared. In 2015, he revealed he was HIV positive, a secret he had kept for years, often while continuing his destructive lifestyle. Even now, Sheen remains a cautionary tale. There have been signs of sobriety, of reconciliation, but the damage lingers. His relationships, his career, and his health all bear the scars of the bottle. A producer once said, "Charlie didn't fall. He jumped and then drank on the way down." And yet, even in ruin, people still hope he'll climb back. Because somewhere beneath the wreckage is a man who once lit up the screen before he set himself ablaze.